My mistress raised my children, Khalil declared before the entire congregation, wrapping an arm around Adeola during his own daughter's baptism. Then he turned to his wife. She never deserved to be called their mother. A few relatives clapped. His mother smiled proudly. Every eye settled on Nia, wading to tears. She simply folded her hands. Then the pastor opened the baptism register, stopped reading halfway down the page, and looked up at Khalil very differently. 2 rows back, an 8-year-old boy named Tadej sat frozen beside his little sister, watching his father praise a woman who was not his mother. And he did not understand the words, but he understood the shape of them, and his small hand found Simi's and held it. That was the thing 400 adults missed while they stared at Nia. The children had heard it too. Their father had stood in the house of God and said their mother was nothing, and somewhere inside that beautiful cathedral, 2 little hearts were breaking in real time, while the grown-ups waited to see who would cry first. Pastor Emeka Nwosu had baptized this family, married its parents, buried its dead. In 22 years, no one had seen his hand stop moving across the register. It stopped now, halfway down a page dated more than 2 years earlier, and his eyes rose from the ink to the smiling man at the font, then dropped to a small boy in a blue blazer standing at the mistress's side, and something in the pastor's face folded shut like a door. Khalil's smile did not move. He had not yet understood that the wife he had come to humiliate had chosen the ground, the hour, and the witnesses, or that the only person in the church who did not know what was written in that book was him. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video, share it, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps this channel grow. Now, let's begin. 11 months earlier, the Adeyemi family looked from the outside like the answer to a prayer. They lived on Bordeaux Road in Ikoyi, behind a wall of bougainvillea, in a white house where the gate opened for 2 Range Rovers, and the driveway was wide enough that guests always remarked on it. But a house is not a family, and what made the Adeyemis enviable was not the driveway. It was the sight of Khalil on a Saturday morning, with Simi riding his shoulders and Tadej running ahead with a football. The handsome father who remembered every waiter's name and could make a whole restaurant laugh. People loved Khalil. It was the first thing anyone said about him. In time, it would become the only true thing they had ever known about him. Nia was quieter, the kind of woman a room takes a while to notice and never quite forgets. She had grown up as the only child of the Ademola family, whose money was older and steadier than her husband's noise, and it was that money, though few guests knew it, that had once given Khalil his start. But Nia did not think about ledgers when she thought about her life. She thought about the weight of her baby daughter asleep on her chest, about Tadej's reading homework, about Simi's habit of climbing into her parents' bed at dawn. She had married Khalil because he made ordinary evenings feel like celebrations. She had believed for 11 years that the warm and generous man everyone saw at the parties was the same man who came home. That belief was the first thing he took from her, and he took it so slowly she almost did not notice it going. The first crack came on an ordinary Tuesday. Khalil's phone lit up on the kitchen island when he was in the shower, and though Naya was not a woman who read her husband's phone, the screen showed a photograph before she could look away. A toddler, perhaps 2, in a blue romper holding a plastic aeroplane, and above it 4 words, "He asked for you again today." The contact was saved only as Site, Lecky. Naya looked at the child for 3 seconds. She noticed his ear, the left one, slightly folded, the same small fold Tade had been teased about at school. Then the shower stopped, and she set the phone face down exactly where it had been, and she said nothing. She told herself there was an explanation. She was very good in those first weeks at telling herself things. What she could not explain away were the children's faces. Khalil had begun to disappear. He missed Tade's Saturday football match, the one Tade had talked about all week, and when the boy came home with a scraped knee and a goal no one had seen, he stood in the doorway of his father's empty study for a long moment before he went quietly up to his room. He missed Simi's school recital, and Simi, 5 years old, asked at bedtime, in the terrible plain way of small children, "Mommy, does Daddy have another family that he likes more?" Naya's whole body went still. "Why would you say that, my love?" And Simi said, "Because Grandma told her friend that Daddy is happier now." Naya tucked the blanket under her daughter's chin and kissed her forehead and said, "Daddy loves you more than the whole sky." And then she went into the bathroom and pressed a towel to her face so no one would hear, because a child had just told her, without knowing it, that the whole family knew something she was still pretending not to. Because that was the second wound, and in some ways the deeper one. It was not only Khalil. His mother, Yawanda, had begun watching Naya at family dinners with a thin, patient smile, the smile of a woman enjoying the last act of a play whose ending pleased her. Now, at a Sunday dinner with cousins around the long table, Yawanda said, lightly passing the rice, "Some women are too busy to raise their own children. In my day, we knew what a woman was for." The table went quiet. Khalil looked at his plate and said nothing, did nothing, and Naya felt the silence of her husband land heavier than her mother's words. She smiled and passed the stew, and under the table Tade slid his hand onto his mother's knee, because even a child could feel who was being hurt. That was the night Naya stopped telling herself things. Something was wrong, and it was not one person. It was the whole house turning against her, one smile at a time. She did not confront him. That was the first real decision, and it shaped everything after. Naya had learned long ago that the one who reacts first loses, that you do not tear down a wall until you know what is holding up the roof. So she did the hardest thing a betrayed woman can do. She went on being a mother. She made the breakfasts, she checked the homework, she held the baby through the night, and while she did, she began, quietly, to learn the truth of her own marriage, because if her family was going to come apart, she was going to understand exactly how, and she was going to make sure that when it fell, it did not fall on her children. The truth, once she looked, was not hidden from the world. It was hidden only from her. Khalil kept a second phone now, charged in the glove box of the black Range Rover so it never came into the house. He had a standing Thursday he called the Lecky Inspection, which ran from noon until long after the children were asleep. Naya let one Thursday pass. On the next, she had her own driver follow, and the black Range Rover did not go to Lecky. It went to a tower on Banana Island, to a marble lobby where a doorman greeted Khalil by name and pressed the lift before he asked. Her driver photographed the building. That night, Naya looked at the pictures and felt the last of her hope go quiet. There was no more ambiguity to hide inside. There was a second phone, a doorman who knew her husband's face, and a little boy with a folded ear who called him Daddy. The disappearances grew a rhythm the children learned to dread. Khalil would promise a Saturday at the beach, ice cream after church, a film all three of them had been waiting for, and then the black Range Rover would pull out of the gate on some sudden errand, and Tade would lower the football he had been holding and carry it back inside without a word. One evening, Simi drew a picture at the kitchen table, the whole family holding hands, but she had drawn her father small and far off at the edge of the paper, almost falling off it. "That's Daddy," she explained. "He's over there because he's always going somewhere." Naya looked at that drawing for a long time after her daughter had gone to bed, and then she folded it carefully and put it away, because it was, in its own child's hand, the truest picture of the marriage anyone had made. She said nothing. She never let the children see her face when it slipped. What she did instead was become the thing they could count on. When Khalil forgot Tade's birthday promise, it was Naya who quietly arranged the trip herself and never told the boy his father had forgotten. When Yewande, at another Sunday dinner, remarked to a cousin that a real mother would not need drivers and nannies, and Tade's ears went red at the injustice done to the mother he adored, it was Naya who caught her son's eye across the table and gave the smallest shake of her head. "Let it go, my love. Don't fight her. I am not hurt." Even though she was, even though every one of those dinners cost her something she never let them see. She was teaching her children, without ever saying it, that dignity was not the same as being loud, and that you could be surrounded by people deciding you were nothing and still, quietly, be everything to the ones who mattered. Across the city, the other woman believed she was winning. Adeola Bankole was 31 and beautiful and had been given a story she badly wanted to be true. In her version, Kalin was a good man trapped with a cold, absent wife, a woman who cared more about her family's money than about her own babies, who left the children to nannies while she flew off to meetings and came home too tired to love them. Khalil told Adeola she was warm where Naya was ice, that the children already loved her, that she was the real mother in every way that counted. He told her she would not have to wait much longer, and Adeola believed it because believing it made her the heroine instead of the secret. When she bathed little Malik and he laughed his father's laugh, she told herself she was already living the life that was coming, and she pictured more and more often the day she would take Naya's place in front of everyone. She had begun, in her mind, to plan the day itself, how she would walk into the family Khalil described as if she had always belonged there, how the cold wife would finally step aside, and how Tade and Simi, starved of a real mother, would come to her at last. She rehearsed small kindnesses she would show them. It never once occurred to her that the children were not starved of anything, that they climbed into Naya's bed at dawn and drew her holding their hands, that the woman she had been taught to despise was the warm center of the very home Adeola was dreaming her way into. She did not know the children she imagined loving had never met her. She did not know Naya had ever heard her name. And Khalil worked the family the way he worked a room. To his cousins he confided, sadly, man to man, that Naya had changed, that she was distant, that the children barely saw her, building, brick by brick, the version of his wife he would need everyone to believe. To Tade and Simi he was all sudden warmth and broken promises, a Saturday trip forever postponed because Daddy has to work, a phone always face down, a study door increasingly closed. He let his mother wound Naya at dinner after dinner and never once said stop. He let Adeola believe she was already secretly his wife. He was not merely lying, he was directing everyone toward the same ending, and he was so sure of it that he had grown careless, dropping the mistress's name into conversation, testing how far his mother's approval could carry him. He had decided that no one would ever say no. No one ever had. But there was a room in the story Khalil did not know Naya had entered. St. Cyprian's Cathedral, where his family had been christened for generations, had begun restoring its crumbling walls and preserving its old parish records, and the quiet benefactor behind that work, through layers of foundation so that no plaque would carry her name, was Naya. She had done it for her father, who had been baptized at that font. And so, one afternoon, sitting in the cool of the parish office while an archivist turned the pages of the old registers on a screen, she saw, without hunting for it, a name she knew. An entry dated 2 years and 3 months earlier. A boy. First name Malik. Mother Adeola Benkol. Father Khalil Adeyemi. She did not gasp. The archivist saw only a woman studying a screen, but inside Naya something finished. The toddler in the blue romper, the folded ear, he asked for you again today. It was not a recent affair. 2 years ago, while she carried Simi through a hard pregnancy, while Khalil held her hand in the hospital and wept the good tears, he had stood at this very font and christened a son by another woman, brazen enough to write his own name in the book of the church his wife had quietly saved. He had not hidden him from God, he had only hidden him from her. She asked the archivist calmly for a certified copy of that page and asked him to tell no one. She slid the certificate into a plain cream envelope and carried it out into the Lagos heat like a thing that might burn her hands. For 3 nights she did not touch the envelope. She kept it in the safe in the study, and once, unable to sleep, she took it out and sat on the floor of the nursery in the dark while the baby breathed. And she came apart, quietly, the back of her hand against her mouth, the way you cry when there are children down the hall. She cried because she had loved him. She cried because for 11 years she had believed the man at the parties was the man in her bed. And she cried because she was so tired of being strong in a house where everyone had already decided she was nothing. That was the crack no one saw. She let it run as long as it needed to. Then she wiped her face and looked in on Simi, who had kicked off her blanket and covered her and stood in the doorway of her sleeping children for a long time. When she went back to the safe and closed it, she was no longer only a wife deciding whether to leave. She was a mother deciding how to protect what was hers. There were nights she almost ended it early. Once she stood outside Khalil's study with the cream envelope in her hand, close enough to hear him laughing softly on the second phone, and everything in her wanted to throw the door open and hold the truth up to his face and watch it break him. Her hand was on the handle. Then she heard Simi's small voice down the hall, a bad dream, calling for her, and Naya turned away from the door and went to her daughter instead, and sat on the edge of the little bed stroking her hair until she slept, and understood that if she confronted him now, in rage in the house, it would fall on the children first. A private explosion would make her feel better for one night and make her a bitter cliché forever, a screaming wife the family could pity and dismiss. She did not want to feel better. She wanted it to be over, cleanly, in a way that left her children safe and left no one able to say she had been anything but calm. So she put the envelope back, and she waited, and waiting was the hardest thing she had ever done. Because Khalil, she realized, did not intend to leave quietly. He was behaving like a man rehearsing an exit, and a man who plans a public exit plans somewhere in it a public humiliation of the wife he is leaving. If there was going to be a stage, Naya decided it would not be his. She would build it herself. The occasion assembled itself out of the ordinary machinery of family life. Baby Enyola was to be baptized. Yewande had been pushing for months for a grand ceremony at St. Cyprian's, the whole clan, the important people, the photographs, and Khalil wanted it even more than his mother did, which was the detail that told Naya everything once she stopped and thought like him. He did not want a christening, he wanted an audience. He meant to bring Adeoa. He meant in front of 400 witnesses and his approving mother and the god of his childhood to install his mistress and shame his wife inside the armor of a sacrament so that anyone who objected would seem to be objecting to a baby's blessing. It was almost clever. It was the plan of a man who had never once been made to lose. So Nia agreed to everything: the grand ceremony, the 400 guests, the choir, the reception afterward. She smiled at Yewande and let her win a small war over the seating. And then, quietly, as the cathedral's unnamed benefactor, she made one arrangement of her own. She asked Pastor Emeka to revive an old St. Cyprian's custom that had lapsed for decades, the reading of the lineage, in which the officiant opens the register to the family's earlier entries and reads them aloud, so the newest child is blessed into the whole line of those baptized at that font before. It was a beautiful tradition. Everyone agreed at once. Khalil, when told, waved a hand and did not listen. He was thinking about where his mother would sit. He did not ask which names were in the book. He had, after all, written one of them there himself, and forgotten that a church keeps what a man would rather it forgot. She told no one the whole of it, not even Zainab, her oldest friend, the one lawyer she trusted, beyond what was needed. Zainab quietly gathered the plain, undeniable proof of who truly owned the house on board alone, the towers, and the very apartment where Adela slept, not Khalil, but the Ademola family. Nia did not intend to lecture anyone about ownership structures. She would simply, at the right moment, lay the truth on the marble and let the silence do the work. She had the register, she had the certificate in the cream envelope, she had one folder of papers she hoped she would barely need. Most of all, she had a decision the night she'd turned away from the study door: that her children would learn none of this from gossip, and that whatever their father had done, they would not lose their mother's steadiness on the same day they lost their family. 3 days before the baptism, Khalil came home happier than she had seen him in a year, and this was the part she had not braced for. He brought white lilies. He cooked, badly and sweetly, the jollof he had made for her when they were young and poor and the future was still a story they told each other. He sat with Tade over his homework, really sat with him, and Tade lit up so brightly at the attention that Nia had to leave the room. And late that night, in the dark, Khalil turned to her and said in a strange, thick voice, "Nia, there's something I should have told you a long time ago." Her heart stopped. For one suspended moment, she thought he might actually confess, that he might, even now, choose the truth and spare them all the cathedral. She waited, and then he exhaled and said, "I've been under so much pressure at work, I haven't been fair to you." And he turned over and slept, and Nia lay awake beside the man who had come to the very edge of honesty and stepped back, and she understood that he would never say it himself. He would let her carry it, the way he let his mother wound her, the way he let everyone else do the hard and ugly things while he kept his hands clean and his smile easy. Even Adela felt a thread of doubt she did not have a name for. Khalil had promised her for 2 years that soon was almost here, and now the baptism was upon them, and he had told her to wear white and to bring Malik, and it thrilled her. Yet once, when she asked him plainly what he would say to her wife, he did not answer. He changed the subject with a joke and a hand on her cheek. She let it go because she wanted the ending he promised more than she wanted the truth of him. But that night she looked at Malik sleeping and felt for just a moment like a woman walking toward a door someone else had built, and she pushed the feeling down and got out the white dress. The morning of the baptism came up hot and cloudless. St. Cyprian's filled with the music of important people arriving, the choir warmed, the stained glass threw long ribbons of gold and blood red across the pews. Yewande worked the aisle in emerald and gold like a general reviewing her troops. Tade and Simi, scrubbed and stiff in their good clothes, sat near the front with their grandmother, and Nia stood by the marble font holding the baby, close enough to her older two that she could reach them. She had promised herself she would keep them close, whatever came. And then Khalil arrived, and he did not come alone. He walked up the aisle of his wife's cathedral with Adiola on his arm, Adiola in white of all colors, white as a bride, and a small boy in a blue blazer at her side, a boy of 2 and a bit with a slightly folded left ear. A murmur ran through 400 people like wind through dry grass. Tade, who had been raised in this church, looked at the strange boy who had his father's ear, and then up at his mother's face, searching it for what to feel. Naya gave him the smallest steady smile, the one that said, "I am here, you are safe," and held her chin level, and did not look away from her son until the fear left his eyes. Khalil lifted his own chin against the murmur. He had decided that if he simply refused to be ashamed, no one could shame him. And why not? His mother beamed her approval from the front row. His cousins had been fed his story for months. The beautiful woman on his arm believed she was about to be crowned, and his wife, he was certain, would do what she had always done, which was absorb it, keep the peace, and say nothing. He genuinely believed the room was his. That was the arrogance the whole morning turned on. He mistook a woman's patience for a woman's weakness, and he had mistaken it for so long that he could no longer tell the difference. Naya looked at Adiola for one moment as she passed, and it was not hatred in her face. It was something closer to pity, and Adiola, catching it, faltered half a step, because it was not the look she had been promised. She had been told the wife was cold and beaten. This woman did not look beaten. This woman looked like she had measured the room. But Khalil was already speaking to the pastor, already gesturing for the ceremony to begin, and the moment passed, and Adiola told herself she had imagined it. Pastor Emeka welcomed the congregation, the choir sang, the baby was brought to the font, and in the hush before the water, Khalil did the thing he had come to do. He could not wait for the reception. The audience was here now, at its largest and holiest. He stepped forward, half turning so the pews could see him, and he began, not the words of the liturgy, but a speech he had clearly been building for weeks. He thanked God, he thanked the church, then he put his arm around Adiola and said the words that would end him. "I want to honor the woman who truly raised my children," he said, warm and generous and terrible. "My mistress raised my children." A ripple of shock, and he wrote it, smiling. Then he turned to his wife, and his voice cooled. She never deserved to be called their mother. A few relatives clapped. Yewande sighed, primed for it. His mother smiled proudly and lifted her chin, and 2 rows back, Tade's face crumpled, and Simi began to cry, small and confused, and that, not the insult, not the clapping, was the thing that moved through Naya like a current. She crossed to her children first before she answered anything, and knelt and gathered them in, and whispered something no one else could hear, and Simi's crying eased. Only then did Naya rise and turn to face her husband. 400 people held their breath, waiting for the tears, the trembling, the flight up the aisle. She did not give it to them. She looked at Khalil for a long, unhurried moment, and then she simply folded her hands and said nothing at all. Her silence was so complete that it began to change the room. The clapping died. Yewande's smile stiffened at the edges, and for just a heartbeat, watching her grandchildren cry and her daughter-in-law kneel to comfort them, something crossed the old woman's face that might have been the first cold touch of doubt, quickly buried. Adiola, wrapped in Khalil's arm, felt for the second time that morning that she had walked into the wrong story. And into that ringing quiet, Pastor Emeka drew the great register toward him across the marble, opened it to the Adiemi pages, and began, in his deep, unhurried voice, to read the lineage, as the tradition asked. He read the marriage of Khalil's grandparents in 1948. He read Khalil's own baptism and Yewande's and a scatter of cousins, and the congregation began, gratefully, to breathe again, because this was ceremony, this was safe. He read the baptism of Tade 6 years earlier, Mother Naya Adiemi, and Simi, and his finger moved down the page toward the present, toward the baby asleep at the font. And then his finger stopped. Halfway down, dated 2 years and 3 months earlier, between Simi and today, was an entry the pastor had not placed there and had never seen. He read it silently once and then again, and Emeka Nwosu, who had baptized this man and married his parents, lifted his eyes from the book to Khalil's face, and the warmth drained out of his own. He did not read it aloud, not yet. The silence stretched, and the silence was the loudest thing in the cathedral. 400 people leaned forward as one. Somewhere a chair scraped. A woman near the back rose halfway to her feet and sat again. The pastor's eyes moved, slowly, deliberately, from Khalil's face to the little boy in the blue blazer at Adiola's side and back, and the whole congregation followed that look and did the arithmetic before a single word was spoken. Whispers began, hissing along the pews like water finding cracks. Yawande's hand tightened on her grandson's shoulder. Adiola's smile was gone, and Khalil, who had walked in holding every card, could not in that instant remember everything he had signed in this church, and he saw in his wife's steady face that she remembered all of it. Emeka closed his eyes for a moment, the way a man does before setting down a weight, and read. "Baptism of Malik Adiemi," he said, and the name landed like a dropped plate. "Aged 3 weeks, father Khalil Adiemi, mother Adiola Bankole, dated the 9th of May, 2 years past, at this font, in this church." He looked up. For a heartbeat there was no sound at all. Then the cathedral came apart, gasps, half-risen bodies, a single cry from near the back, and Adiola's hand flew to her mouth, not in triumph but in horror, because she had believed Malik was her secret and Khalil's, private proof of a love no one else in the world knew, least of all the wife. She had believed she was hidden. She was learning in front of 400 people that she had been named in a book 2 years ago, and, worse, reading Nia's unsurprised face, that the wife had known and had said nothing and had let him walk his mistress and his secret son up this aisle, knowing exactly what was written there. "You knew," Khalil said to Nia. It was not a question. His voice came out thin. "How long have you known?" And Nia, standing between her 2 crying children and her sleeping baby, gave him the answer the whole city would repeat for months. 11 months, Khalil, I have known. I knew when your mother called me nothing at her own table and you looked at your plate. I knew when you missed Tade's match and Simi's recital. I knew when you brought me lilies 3 nights ago and cooked my jollof and could not, even then, tell me the truth." She let it sit. "You wanted an audience for this." Her eyes did not leave his. "So do I." She handed the baby gently to Zainab, who had risen from the second pew, and she reached into the deep pocket of her dress and drew out the plain cream envelope. She walked to the marble font, slowly, so everyone could see there was nothing hurried or hysterical in her, and laid it open beside the register, drawing out the certified certificate so the stained glass light fell across it in gold and red. "The register is the church's copy," she said. "This is mine, certified, in case anyone here decides tonight that the book was mistaken." Then she turned to Adiola, and for the first time all morning she spoke directly to the younger woman, and there was no cruelty in it, which made it land harder. "He told you I abandoned my children. Look at them." She did not point, she only glanced at Tade and Simi, who had not left her side. "He told you I was cold, that the money was his, that soon you would take my place. Look at his mother's face and tell me if you were ever going to be more than useful to him." Yewande had gone gray beneath the emerald. "You are not the villain here, Adiola. You are just the last one to be told the truth." And then Thea set the truth about the money down without a lecture, in a single beat, because that was all it needed. She laid 1 page from the folder on the marble beside the certificate. This house, these towers, the apartment where he kept you, none of it was ever his. It is my family's, and it always has been. Every gift he gave you, Khalil gave with my hand." Her voice thinned for one syllable to a blade. "So when you tell 400 people your wife did nothing, understand that I paid for the church you shamed me in, and the font your son was christened at, and the shirt on your back. I did nothing, and I did all of it." She closed the folder. "That is the last truth. There is no deeper one. There is only what happens now." Khalil came apart in front of everyone, and it was not loud, which was the worst of it for the watchers who had wanted a spectacle. His squared shoulders rounded inward. His hands, which had spent a lifetime gesturing at towers, opened and closed on nothing. He looked to his mother, and Yewande would not meet his eyes. She was already doing the arithmetic her son could not yet bear to do, and it was making her old in her pew. He looked to Adiola, and Adiola stepped back out of the circle of his arm, one step, then another, and gathered little Malik against her legs, and her face was that of a woman who has just seen the whole shape of the man who promised her the world, and found it was the shape of someone who lied to her too. He looked last to his wife, and found her already turning toward her children, and he said her name once, Nia, in a voice like a child's. She did not turn back. At the font, oblivious, baby Aniola awoke and began softly to cry, and Pastor Emeka, because a sacrament is a sacrament and a child is a child, took up the water and over the ruins of a family blessed her. The talking crossed all of Lagos by Monday and doubled back by Tuesday, but talk is only weather. What mattered was what happened to the people, and over the weeks and months that followed, it happened the way such things do. Khalil's business could not survive the truth once everyone had seen it laid on the marble. The empire he had described at 100 dinners turned out to have belonged to his wife's family all along, and the friends who had loved him at the parties discovered, one by one, that they were busy. He moved into a small flat his mother co-signed, and the story followed him there. Yewande, who had smiled so proudly in her emerald and gold, found the club quieter when she entered it, and the cousins who had clapped less eager to be photographed at her side. She learned in her old age the particular loneliness of having bet on the wrong child. And Adiola went home to her mother's house in Ibadan with her son and her ruined dream. But it was Nia in the end, coolly and through the lawyers, who made sure Malik would be provided for. Not for Khalil's sake, and not for Adiola's, for the boys. A child does not choose the men who make him, and Nia had never once mistaken a boy for the sins of his father. But the ending that mattered was smaller and quieter than any of that, and it happened in the White House on Bordelon Road. For a while, the children were fragile. Tade grew watchful and asked hard questions at bedtime. Simi cried for a father who did not come. Nia did not lie to them, and she did not poison them. She told them in words a child could hold that grown-ups sometimes break their promises, that none of it was their fault, and that she was not going anywhere. She kept the mornings ordinary, the breakfasts, the homework, the school run, because ordinary, she had learned, is what safety feels like to a frightened child. Slowly the watchfulness left Tade's eyes. Slowly Simi climbed into her mother's bed at dawn again and slept without dreaming. There was a night early on when Tade came to her doorway in the dark and asked in a very small voice whether it had been his fault, whether if he had been better his father would have stayed, and Nia sat him on the edge of her bed and took his face in both her hands and told him the truest thing she knew, that a father's leaving is never a child's doing, that he was good and loved and enough, that some men break their own homes and it is not the children who broke them. She held him until his shoulders stopped shaking. It was, of all the terrible nights of that terrible year, the one she was proudest of, because it had nothing to do with winning. There came an evening months later when Nia looked up from the kitchen and saw her two older children laughing over a board game on the floor while the baby banged a spoon in her high chair, and no one in the room was afraid, and she had to stand very still for a moment to hold it. She had taken her own name back, Nia Adamola, and with it the chairmanship of the company her father had built and she had run in all but title for years. She poured herself into it and into a project her father had sketched and never lived to raise. A slender tower on the Lagos waterfront with a free public garden at its base so that any family in the city could walk into a green and open place for nothing. But she measured her days now in smaller things than buildings, in Tade's improving spelling, in Simi's front tooth gap, in the baby's first steps taken across the sitting room rug into her waiting hands. On the morning the tower topped out, Nia rode up alone at first light and stood in the wind with the whole gold sprawl of Lagos below her. She did not think about Khalil. That was what surprised her, not the victory, but the quiet where the anger used to be. She thought about her children, safe and asleep in a house that was, and had always been, hers. She thought about the towel she had once pressed to her face in a locked bathroom so no one would hear, and about the woman who had knelt on a nursery floor in the dark, and she was gentle with that woman now, the way you are gentle with someone who survived something. Then she took the lift back down, because Tade had a match that morning, and this time someone was going to be there to see the goal. Nia Adamola walked out into the ordinary light of an ordinary Saturday, and for no one but herself, she smiled. Foreverb. If you enjoyed this story, don't just watch and leave. Like this video, share it with friends and family, and most importantly, subscribe to this channel for more powerful and interesting stories. Bye. See you in the next one.